All right, my friend. It is Thursday night, 11 p.m. Eastern. I got two guests today on our YouTube channel. We got Don Dunn from HD 2020. How you doing, Don?
What's up, brother? Hi, everybody.
Jackson! Gotta get him with that all the time.
Gargamel.
And of course, we have Anthony Grimani. And you have like 5 companies. I don't know how to introduce you. What's your primary company?
Let's just say Anthony Grimani from Grimani Systems, and PMI Engineering is probably the easiest way to look at it.
All right, there we go. So we decided that this is going to be our regular night, Thursday night, 11 p.m. We're going to be doing a weekly thing here, talking about room acoustics, and even beyond that. I mean, first I want to just get the basics going. I want everybody to understand the importance of room acoustics, the different types of treatments, and then we could break it off into, you know, more macro or micro topics in the home theater and how to improve your sound. So in this particular video, we're going to be talking about the different types of room treatments, you know, bass traps. We're talking about absorption, diffusion, all that kind of stuff. So I want to kind of have Anthony has a slideshow presentation. And if you guys are patrons, if you're subscribed to our Patreon channel, we have that full slide presentation there. You could download it, you could access it, you could reference it at any time. So one of the perks of being an Audioholics patron. But I'm going to hand it over to Anthony, and he's going to kind of do his thing, and then we'll just interject when we have questions or if there's people doing super chats or anything like that.
Yeah, hi everybody. How's it going? Thanks for being back. So we started this thing, I guess, on Sunday, talking about the importance of acoustics and like what, you know, who cares? What's the deal? Why do we, you know, acoustic seems like an occult black art that only like secret society guys that know the secret handshake go do, and not so. Actually, acoustics is pretty straightforward. When you get to small room acoustics, the stuff that happens in the rooms we're interested in, you know, between 15 and 30 feet long, there's some idiosyncrasies, some things that are not yet completely understood, but there's a fair amount of data, a lot of experience. My peers and I have been doing enough rooms that we kind of figured out, hey, here's what works. So I'm going to be talking about that. So
when you see, so just to clarify this, there's a difference in how you treat a room, whether it's a small room like a home theater, a personal home theater, versus a giant venue like a movie theater or an amphitheater. Totally different environment, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. The first of all, in the field of acoustics, if you like go to a conference of acousticians, you know, when there is not COVID, people get together once a year at one of the big acoustical society conferences, whether it's here or in Europe or both. And you got people who like work in large room acoustics, and those are typically, think of those as concert halls, big train stations, stuff like that. There's people who work on medium room acoustics, which would be like lecture halls for universities and stuff like that. And there's people who specialize in small room acoustics, which is the stuff we're interested in. And the reason there's a level of specialization is that the way the ear brain interprets how sound bounces around in these spaces is pretty different. If you think of a big hall, like a big concert hall, you know, instruments are playing sound, and some of it goes directly to the ear and some of it bounces off surfaces. And there's a good 200 or 300 or 400 milliseconds in the difference in time between that direct sound and the sound that's like bounced off the walls and the ceiling. And there's a way that your brain interprets that. And you go into a small room and there's a speaker over here or a guitarist like right here, and the sound goes directly to you. And then the reflected sound off a wall could arrive back 3-4 milliseconds later, just really, really short. And there's a different way that your brain deals with that. And so the differences really are notably in the psychological sides of it, what's all known as psychoacoustics. How do you interpret that? How does your brain deal with what's going on to your ears, and how do measurements and specs actually get used so that in the end it sounds good? Now, there's a whole field of study on that. So one of my goals in life is to become a psychoacoustician, so I can tell people at parties, and they say, you know, what do you do? It's like, I'm a psychoacoustician, and just watch their reaction. It's like, this guy admitted he's psycho, and then something else. I don't know. Some psychoesthetician. I don't really know, but I'm not talking to him. That gives me more time to drink more, you know, whiskeys or whatever is there. So that's a long answer to your short questions. Like, yeah, there are differences in how you describe and treat things in a big, medium, and small room. So in movie theaters, which is sort of our reference, right? When we're talking about a home cinema, we're talking about replicating a soundtrack with the experience that it was originally destined for the large movie theater. Whether that keeps going on is an unknown, right? A lot of change in this last year. But there's a certain sound character to what happens in a movie theater. And a lot of my work in the last about 30 years has been about how to bring that sonic and visual experience into a room in a home environment. And so there's certain translations you need to do. Certain things are a little different, but in the end, there's a way to trace back the experience so that it sounds exactly the same. Why make it sound the same? Simply because when the movie's being made, there's a director, there's a producer, there's a sound designer, and then when it's time to make the actual soundtrack, there's a re-recording mixer or whatever the name of the person is that's actually deciding how to make the soundtrack. And they're listening to sound in a movie theater. It's not a movie theater that's your local multiplex. It's a room the size of a movie theater, big screen. There's some seats. There's a big mixing console in the middle, all this equipment. But it's basically the size of a movie theater, and that's the reference. So if you want to hear a soundtrack the way it was intended to be, the ideal place to go to is the actual studio where it was recorded, which if you have enough disposable income, you can just rent the studio and go, I want to watch Avengers right here. They'll let you in. You can watch it. It's a little expensive.
Watch Avengers in the Stag Theater. That'd be awesome.
Watch it in the Stag Theater, like where it was actually monitored when it was being mixed. So you can do that, or you can follow the rules we're going to talk about in the next few weeks about what you do, how you treat the acoustics, where you put the speakers, how do you tune it, and get to an experience that's really, really, really close, which is cool. Awesome. So you can do this at home. So Sunday we talked about the basics about why worry about acoustics, and I introduced kind of some of the stuff that happens in your brain and what the room does to your interpretation of that. And today I'm going to go do a little bit of a recap of that and talk about kind of the last few slides of that. And then I'm going to go into a pretty deep dive about absorbers, just absorbers. And you go, man, how much can you talk about absorbers? A lot.
And Don, you better not make any ball jokes about that guy illustrated in this diagram.
Who, me? I'm not saying nothing.
So first off, as a recap from last time, this is a room seen from the top. It's a balding guy with glasses. You can't really tell over here. Seen from the top, and around the room is in this case a 7-channel system. We're not putting the different Atmos speakers and stuff because there's no room. And layered around the room is a bunch of acoustical treatments. And I always love to talk about goals. Where are we trying to get to? When we get in the car, we're going to drive. Where are we trying to go? And well, sometimes you can just randomly drive around. But if you're trying to get to Chicago, there's a certain road you have to take from wherever you're starting to get there. And so where are we trying to get? So this, to me, is an idealized representation of a room that's been acoustically studied and treated and what the sound quality and character is going to be. So first off, there is going to be, if you're listening to sound off the center channel, there's going to be a direct path of sound from the center speaker to your head. It's going to enter your 2 ears equally. That's the green line that's known sometimes as the direct sound. I'm representing it as an arrow, a vector. In reality, that's not how sound propagates. It's not little arrows shot out by the speaker. It's actually waves that roll around through the air between the speaker and you. But just for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to represent it as an arrow. Now, those typical speakers today are fairly wide dispersion, and they're not just going to send sound at you. They're also going to send sound off axis this way and that way out to some number of degrees, depending on the speaker. And so if we look at the off-axis sound, you're going to see some sound bouncing and hitting an absorber panel. It gets basically killed there. It may hit a diffuser panel where it gets scattered. It may hit another absorber where it gets absorbed. It may hit a piece of wall where it bounces around. But ultimately, a typical speaker in a typical home cinema, some sound's going to go directly to you. Some sound's going to go off axis and bounce back to you. Some of it's going to find an absorber and just stop right there. Some of it's going to find a scattering panel called a diffuser, and it's going to get scattered into little pieces. And that's what I'm trying to represent by these like small arrows over here. All right. So that's that's the story of where we're trying to go. We're trying to obtain a smooth sound field so that the sound is not chaotic and all hard and reflective. And for more on that, go back and look at the other webinar. And we're trying to obtain a sound with what's called, I'm going to get geeky and psychoacoustic, a sound that has binaural dissimilarity.
See, that's counterintuitive, because for years we thought you want to have symmetry on both sides of the wall. Everybody treats the first reflection points with absorption. They do the ceiling with absorption. You want symmetry. So now what you're showing here is wherever you have an absorption panel on the right wall, you have a diffusion panel on the left wall at that same location.
Yeah, absolutely. And I am going to get to that quite a bit more in a few sessions as we start to. What I'm going to do is I'm going to break down what's an absorber, what are all the different choices. What is a diffuser? What's all the different choices? What's a bass trap? What are all the different choices? And then I kind of put it all together. I'm going to talk about this asymmetrical thing. So what's really interesting is 4 years, researchers in acoustics and psychoacoustics have been claiming you should have binaural dissimilarity. You would find those claims by reading obscure books on the topic, by going to those conferences where acousticians and psychoacousticians meet. And I would say at least for the last 30 years, it's been known, 30 or 40, it's been known that the most enjoyable sound is one where you have a correlated sound from the source to you, whether it's a speaker or an instrument, and where the sounds bouncing around the room arrive back at your head at different times where they're scrambled, and what's actually going into your ears from the reflected field is actually dissimilar. If it is similar, if you could actually build a room, which you could, in which there's speakers and there's hard walls, they're like really painted, really bright and hard, and the sound bounces off those two walls absolutely identically, your brain's going to actually think that's another center speaker. And it's going to narrow up the sound field. I've heard of a fair number of rooms like that. I've heard people complain. It's like, everything sounds narrow. I got these great speakers and it all sounds narrow. And you start to put some treatments on the wall and it's like, wow, suddenly I get the whole sound stage. And that's because you do need some of that. For more info on that, look at the work actually as far as back as from Schroeder from decades and decades ago, and other researchers in the field that have talked about this binaural dissimilarity. Another word is low interoral cross correlation. So if you go to a party and you say, I'm a psychoacoustician and I'm really interested in binaural dissimilarity and low interoral cross correlation, I guarantee no one's going to want to talk to you.
You get all the girls.
Yeah.
The girls, sorry, Don, the girls really are not that interested unless they like geeks. And if they were like, wow, you're not talking about football or cars, you sound kind of interesting. Whatever, to each her own or his own, right?
Absolutely. I mean, what's amazing to me is how the science has progressed, and it's so different from what we did as integrators 20 years ago, 25 years ago, 10 years ago. It was the first reflections, a couple of diffusers, maybe a bass trap, and they thought they were really doing it correctly. Now the science and people like you are really bringing this to a whole new level, and it's super exciting because I always tell people you can put an amazing set of speakers in a room and have a terrible room and just get terrible sound, or a mediocre set of speakers in a room that's a great room and get great sound. I mean, this is awesome.
And in my practice, I've seen that a lot. I'll get a call from somebody who goes, I just bought these $20,000 a piece speakers and this amazing amp and it sounded great in the store and sounds horrible in the store. Doesn't know what to do. What can you do? It's like,
been there.
Let's take a look.
Or shoving like coffin-sized speakers all around the room and have no room treatments and not even be a dedicated room.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
That's speakers.
That's Gene's favorite room. He sent me a picture of yesterday. It's like,
oh yeah.
Wow. The client must think highly of it.
Audioholic for sure.
Or the whisper walls where they did the tracking in the cloth and they would roll some like 1/4 inch thick material, and it was terrible. But they said sometimes they didn't even use acoustically transparent material. That was the kicker.
Right. So if you take a room like that that is treated with stretch fabric wall systems that were really designed for convenience and for use in, let's admit it, in commercial spaces, in office and meeting rooms where you're trying to, get rid of echoes, and you put those systems on the walls. 1 second, hold on. I even have a little show and tell. Please hold. So this is a piece of stretch fabric track. This particular one is from Nova Wall. There's about 5 or 6 brands of these things. It is an inch deep. It's made to go on a wall. You just, actually staple it with a power stapler here and here. And then you put an inch of dense fiberglass or glass fiber for you guys who are not in the US. And then you shove into this track right here. With a special little spatula looking thing, you push fabric on both sides of that.
The butter knife.
The butter knife.
Yeah.
And the fabric gets shoved in there. And you get, if you do it right, it's a really nice finish. It looks like wallpaper. Beautiful. It's convenient. And it's maybe great for a conference room. But for speakers playing good quality sound, what you've just done is you've put 1 inch of absorption around the whole room. You've basically killed everything above 1 kilohertz. And then below that, you get some low frequency rumble.
It's a low pass filter, basically.
Right. It's funny. It's a high pass filter for the sound that's going in there, low pass filter for the sound that's bouncing, or low pass filter for the sound that's going in, high pass filter for everything else. But now what you end up with is above 1 kilohertz, you just have the speakers and you have a really high binaural similarity, and that may not sound so good. So ultimately, looking at geeky diagrams, what we're trying to get to, in my opinion, is a sound character where there's a direct sound, and then there's a field of reflection and reverberation around you that's not killed. So I gave the example of 1 inch for the sake of convenience, but if you did 2 inches or 3 inches or 4 inches of absorption all the way around the room, it would also sound bad because your ear brain wants to hear some reflections. And just how much I'm about to show you. But ultimately, if you can keep sort of this image in your mind, this drawing that shows that ideally a well-treated room is one that gives you some amount of direct sound, that's the green arrow, and then some amount of reflected energy that evenly envelops you from all around, you're going to end up with something really pleasing as an experience, whether it's for 2-channel or multi-channel music or film. That's what works. Now, the rest of all the slides I'm going to present is all going to be about how do we get to this. So first thing is, to get to that, there's a basic acoustic recipe I've just found over the years, just kind of like if you cook a lot, that if you put about this much salt and put about this much olive oil and this much stuff, it all tastes good. If you cover the walls of a room and the ceiling with about 15% of absorptive surface, that only means that there's still 85% of the surface that's not absorbed. So that's not a lot. Just 15% of absorptive surfaces, assuming you have carpeting on the floor, and assuming you have some seats and some stuff around the floor that's kind of soft and squishy, and you distribute those surfaces evenly. The way to distribute them is to either do 2 foot by 2 foot panels or 2 foot by 4 foot panels and just put them evenly around the room. You will lower the reflected energy enough that you're going to get an improvement in the sound quality.
Now, obviously, you want these panels within the listening plane of the speaker, right? Or the listening plane of, you want them like ear level. I mean, because you're not covering the whole wall. If it's a 10-foot wall, you're only putting a 2x4
right.
panel.
So how far up do you put them? Well, if you put them all above your head, you've added some absorption in the room, but you still have some echo. So usually we tend to put them about a minimum of 12 inches below your ear height, which is typically 39 or 40 inches off the floor. So minimum of 12 inches, sometimes 18 or 20 inches. And then you go up about, again, another 1.5 feet or 2 feet. So if I have some diagrams for this, but typically just think of what's going on the wall is essentially covering below your ear, going above your ear with some absorption, and then stopping, because we want to maintain some reflection in the room. So I'm going to keep saying that. We want to maintain some reflection in the room. It's a common misnomer from people that the minute I start talk about acoustical treatments, I want to cover all the walls. Like, nope, that's not going to work. So I like food. I think most people like food. And we all know that if you put a bit of salt in your food, it tastes good, unless you have hypertension issues. Well, it still tastes good, but you got to be careful.
Exactly, yeah.
And there is such a thing as too much salt, right? There's just the right balance. Same thing with pepper, same thing with all the other spices. So you got to be careful. Next element in my little recipe is in addition to the 15% of absorptive surfaces, I like to have about 15 to 20% of scattering surfaces, diffusive surfaces. These are surfaces that break up the sound. They don't absorb it. They re-radiate it in the room, kind of broken up into smaller pieces. There's a whole bunch of different types. I'll loosely put those into two camps, what I'm going to call 2D, which is not the D and the dimension of a quadratic equation for those of you who are familiar with that. I'm just talking about the re-radiation pattern. So I call a 2D diffuser one in which the incident sound hits the device and it gets re-radiated on a two-dimensional plane. And then I call a 3D diffuser one in which the sound that hits the device is re-radiated hemispherically into a three-dimensional plane. That's what I mean by that. I think of it as the resulting geometry of what comes off the material. I like to interleave those panels with the absorption. I do not like to put all the absorption in the front and all the diffusion in the back. That was a theory in the 70s. Doesn't work so well in reality. So I like to interleave them. And the result of having scattering panels in the room is you improve the sense of spaciousness, and you actually fool your ear brain to feel that you're in a bigger room than you really are. Because in big rooms, there's naturally some delayed reflections that are all kind of scattered out over time. And your brain education tells you, hey, I'm in a room with a bunch of scattered, non-correlated sound. It must be big. So you can actually make it.
To interrupt you real quick.
Yep.
When you're saying you could acoustically treat a room and make the space sound larger than it really is, if you have been to any of the trade shows in the past, which you have, and I'm talking for people that haven't been to trade shows, and you go into these dealer demo booths, Denon, whatever, all these different brands, they do their little demos. They did exactly the opposite. They would do a lot of absorption in that space, and you feel like you're walking into an anechoic chamber, like a black hole,
a tomb.
And that gives a bad rap for room acoustics because you say, I don't want to have a dead room. So you're telling us here that the way you're treating a room is you could walk into that room and still have a natural conversation and perceptually feel like the room is bigger than it was before it was treated.
Perceptually, on the sound coming off the speakers, if you treat it correctly, I guess if you could instantly make all of the materials evaporate, imagine you could do that. And we have a way to do that in our showroom. I'll explain in a second. But if you could magically make all the panels that evaporate, your brain would go, wow, I think I know that I'm in a 16 by 20 foot room. And then you could magically put back in the absorbers and scattering devices. You go, wow, the music just sounds a lot bigger than the room.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, you can do that.
Anthony, years ago when I was training with your friend Keith Yates, one thing he said that kind of stuck in my mind, he's like, a properly designed room, the wall should disappear when the lights come down, and you should be absorbed into the worlds of Lucasfilm or Spielberg. And that always stuck in my brain of how to make the walls disappear and completely absorb you into the film. And I thought that was a great statement.
Yeah. That's exactly it. So like I talked about last Sunday, your ear brain is incredibly powerful at knowing where sound reflections come from. And based on the time and the direction it takes from the direct sound and the reflected sound, you can go, there's a wall somewhere there. Now, you don't know it consciously, but your unconscious is using that all the time. Mm-hmm. And when you're trying to listen to a big concert or you're watching a scene in a movie that's like a really big space, and you're trying to see and believe big, but the walls keep telling you, yep, there's a reflection right here. It's 5 feet from you. It's hard for your brain to accept that disconnect, that cognitive dissonance. If you can put some absorbers and put some scattering diffusers on the walls, you can break that a bit. Okay, not completely, but a whole lot better than if you did nothing. And that's a really important point. Okay, so with that in mind, that's ultimately the acoustics recipe. Include the ceiling. I see people sometimes do treatments on the sidewalls, but forget the ceiling. The ceiling reflections are very audible. You got to treat them also with absorption and diffusion. And don't forget to treat the bass. So you want to treat the room evenly across the entire frequency range. You don't want to just treat the mid-range or just the high frequency, but you want to have a treatment system that goes from the highest frequencies to the lowest frequencies. And I'm trying to draw that in your direction. From the highest frequencies to the lowest frequencies. And there's ways to do that by using good low frequency absorbers. I'll talk about in a session later. Okay. You guys are okay with all this? Mm-hmm. I've used up 25 minutes of our time. It's amazing.
This is awesome. Keep it coming.
All right. Let's talk about absorbers. So what does an absorber do? It essentially is a device that turns the impinging sound that hits it into something different. The typical absorbers are actually frictional. They're usually a thickness of fiberglass or rock wool. And I thought I actually had brought a piece of raw absorption home, and I did not. Okay, sorry, my bad. But basically, think of a big chunk of either foam or fiberglass. The waves that hit it actually friction inside the little particles and turn into heat. So absorbers convert sound into heat. If you have a saxophone playing a sound out of a center speaker and going to you, and then going over to the wall where it may reflect back and distort the original sound, an absorber just is like a sponge, but it converts the sound into heat. Absorbers come in all kinds of different thicknesses. And this is one of the first gotchas. They got to be thick enough to work well for sound. So what does that mean? A 1-inch panel, which is 25 millimeters, 2.5 centimeters, because of the size of wavelengths, is going to work down to about 1,000 hertz, a 1 kilohertz, which is right down sort of the middle of the auditory spectrum. And then below that, they stop working. And that's what is shown in this red line. So this would be a 1-inch thick panel. Works down, it absorbs really well down to 1 kilohertz, and then bye-bye, it starts to lose it. A 2-inch thick panel works down to 500 hertz. So that's the blue one, works down to 500 hertz and then loses efficiency. A 4-inch thick panel works down to 250 hertz and then starts losing it. Now, little secret, a 4-inch thick panel on a 2-inch furring rail, piece of 1 by 1.5 by 3.5, also known as a 2x4, will work down to about 150 hertz and then say bye-bye. That's kind of useful. So
but you lose a little absorption at higher frequencies when you offset it off the wall, right? So you can't go too far off the wall, like maybe half the distance of the thickness.
You do lose a little bit of absorption, and that's actually a good thing because most rooms have too much high frequency absorption. So we're going to build on this. To me, the ideal absorber is one that works all the way down to about 150 or 200 hertz, goes up to about 3 or 4 kilohertz, and actually tapers down a little bit to counter the fact that there's carpets and other stuff in the room that's gonna suck out that high frequency. Also counter the fact that most speakers start to narrow up at high frequency, and you're losing those reflections. So the highest end absorbers I've made are ones that actually have a tapered response. It costs more money to build it that way. Mm-hmm. So what do you want? What's the right answer? Well, I would recommend never doing just 1-inch absorption because unless you're just talking about controlling voice in a conference room, which is not what we're here to talk about. If you're talking about listening to speakers and making them sound good, I would recommend that the things you put on the wall be at least 2 inches thick, 5 centimeters, 50 millimeters, and preferably 4 inches thick, which makes them kind of big and ugly, right? And so that's the reality is if you want it to work, you got to go thick enough. So how do you make it be thick and not too ugly? Well, there's all kinds of different tricks. There's a panel we make in the Sonatus line. I don't know if I'll be able to show this given the distances over here, where we actually make it kind of curved. So the edges, the thickness is actually 5 inches here. Mm-hmm. But the edges are only about 2.5 or 3 inches. And when you put it on the wall, it just doesn't look quite as obtrusive because, your eye catches the thinner edge. You can also do wedge-shaped panels, things that taper down, whatever it is, so that it doesn't look quite so thick.
Now, how do you hang those on the wall? They're pretty lightweight, so you don't really need to reinforce too much, right?
So all the different panels out there from different vendors have their own mounting scheme. In this particular line, one of the options is to mount it on magnets. So there's these neodymium magnets, and on the wall, wow. Where's the wall? You put a screw with a big fender washer, and the thing just goes click.
Nice. So
that's super cool. That's actually super cool.
That's super cool. Now we use that in our showroom to I'll do a demo with everything up, all the absorbers and diffusion, and I'll go. Somebody walks in the show, 2 people walk in and they go click, 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 click. And within, about 20 seconds, the room is live. And I go, okay, let's listen to that again. And people are like, whoa, I had no idea it was that big of a deal. No.
Great thing about that is if you change your speakers in the room, you can literally move the absorption and diffusion around with magnets and that's that. Yeah.
So Anthony, can I grab you for a second and have you talk about carpet a little bit? There's so many misconceptions about you have to put carpet in a sound room. Can you elaborate on that for a minute?
Yeah, that's interesting. So first of all, carpet's pretty thin, or it can be thick. Shag, man. Y'all should have green shag. No.
Yeah, baby.
So yeah, baby. So regular thin carpet really only absorbs the highest frequencies, which is not really what you want to absorb. So if you have thin carpeting, make sure you put it on a pad, and the pad should be some kind of fibrous material, that thing that sort of looks like felt or recycled fabric. And so now you have something that's maybe about 3/4 inch or 1 inch thick. Realize it only works down to 1 kilohertz. So if you line the entire floor of your listening room with that kind of carpeting, just note that your entire floor is now sucked out all the reflections above 1 kilohertz and reflected everything below. It's that low pass, high pass filter that Gene was talking about. By the way, Gene, your microphone's a little quiet compared to Don's. Okay. So that's not necessarily a good thing to do. My favorite way to do carpeting, I know it's going to sound kind of, another one of those like, well, I never heard that, is actually a perimeter of wood. Right. So imagine walking into the room and there's actually a walkway all the way around that's wood floor. And then you cut the wood material. You leave actually a pit in the middle of the room that's about this thick, because you've stopped the wood boards. And in that you drop a nice thick backer and then a carpet. So now you have carpet where the pile sticks up a little bit over the wood, so it looks natural, but you have a nice thick surface of absorptive material on the floor. And typically, aim for 30 or 40% up to 50% of the surface being carpet. Does that answer your question, Don?
Well, it does, because there's a lot of rooms we do now that aren't carpeted. So and I almost prefer the aesthetics. I mean, I like a rug, like in a sound room, like a traditional sound room. In a Gene's house, we're doing a tile in his room that actually looks like hardwood, and we're going to put a nice rug in the front. But
I got a really good for that.
Yeah, I really like the aesthetics better without having carpet in the room.
Right. Now, for you serious audioholics, if you're building a room from scratch and you have choices of what you can do with the floor, if you can actually do an absorptive pit at the front of the room, so between the speaker and you, and we can talk some other time of exactly where that is, but at the first bounce reflection point, if you can actually create a pit that's 4 or 5 inches deep that you're going to fill with absorption. You put a grill on the top of that, some perforated metal grill, and I have a sample of that maybe I'll find in this box.
He's got all these tools in his bag of tricks.
I know. I feel so inadequate.
There's a company called McNichols that makes all these different perforated metals. This is a perforated material. You put that on framing on top of that pit. You put your carpet on top. Now you have a thing that's absorbing nice and deep in an area generally around that first floor reflection, but not a small zone. You maybe make it 2 or 3 feet by 5 or 6 feet wide. Okay. And then you can back off on the carpeting, and you have really the ideal condition there.
How far back from the front speakers would that be? Would that be something like the first reflection points?
Yeah,
on the sidewall.
Exactly that. Well, it may not match the sidewalls because they may be at a totally different place, but the reflection point off the floor. Put a mirror on the floor. Look at where you see the speakers in that mirror. That's a good place to do it. If you're just doing things on paper, just kind of figure out where that bounce is, that angle of incidence and angle of reflection
from
thing
from the listening position.
At the main listening position, not at the back wall, not somewhere else, not at the door, but at the seat position.
I've actually never heard of that. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's a little thing we do on high-end construction. It's a little more complicated, but
when you're
going to have a joisted floor, if you're if you're actually building a room from scratch and you're pouring a concrete slab, it's no big sweat to have a little depression there. Mm-hmm. Depression is good sometimes, man. Okay, now this is a little thing we talked about a few seconds ago, which is if you take an absorber and lift it off the wall by 1 inch or 2 inches or whatever, you get more low frequency performance. So this would be the performance of some panel on the wall. Let's just say a 2-inch panel, that's 500 hertz here. That needs at 500. If you put it 2 inches away from the wall, I'll put it on 1.5 inches, which is conveniently a 2x4 on flat. For those of you guys listening outside this country, in the US, we have this thing called a 2-inch by 4-inch, except that they're 1.5 inches by 3.5 inches. And you go, those Americans are crazy. Well, a little bit. Long story, don't have time to get into it. But if you peel it away from the wall, you get better low frequency and you get a little less high frequency performance, which is actually generally good because, like I said, most rooms have too much high frequency absorption anyway. So that's a way to save money also, because you can just buy a 1-inch panel and put it on a 1-inch gap, and then it's just the price of the 1-inch panel instead of 2-inch, or a 2-inch panel and put it on a 2-inch furring strip or some spacer, and you save yourself money on a 4-inch panel.
So would a 2-inch panel with a 2-inch air gap be equivalent to a 4-inch panel flat against the wall?
On the low frequency, it's pretty close.
Right.
Not exactly, but pretty close. And the reason it's not exactly is you're actually losing the absorption from the side of the panel, which if it's a correctly done panel, you actually get absorption in the, that's the back, in the front, and on the back. So this is a regular fabric wrapped absorber that if you have time,
show that again. Show that again. I didn't have that on. I'm sorry.
Okay. So this is actually, this one's protected. This is a small sample, 12-inch by 12-inch sample of a regular absorber panel, which is in this case, a 2-inch thickness of dense fiberglass with reinforced edges and fabric covering it. And it's also covered in plastic for your protection. Gotcha. But some of the absorption comes from the sound that's being absorbed, passing the fabric here and going into the fiberglass. And on some panels, not all of them, some of the absorption is also here. A 4-inch thick panel, you get all of this absorption. A 2-inch thick panel that's 2 inches from the wall, you just have a gap here. But that's not that big of a deal. Yep. Okay, so notes on absorption. Do not over absorb the room. I think I've said that now. What, Gina, are you counting like 5 or 6 times? It's 7 times?
Yeah.
It's really common for people to start to want to put that stuff everywhere. It's going to just sound bad. So don't do that. Dead rooms sound odd. Just don't do it. Target, generally in most of the rooms we're working in, given the sizes, what's called the reflection decay time, also known as RDT, should be around 1/3 of a second. You can measure that with some pretty simple tools. You can go buy a USB test microphone from one of the various vendors, and you can download a program called Room EQ Wizard. Please give them $50 of a donation for how amazing the program is. Go through their tutorials, plug that thing into your sound system, feed a what's called an impulse response sweep, and you'll actually be able to measure from your speakers to your seat position. If you at all a bit of an audio geek and technically inclined, you can do this without too much hassle. You'll be able to measure the reflection decay time of your room, and right around 0.3 seconds is a good average target for most of the rooms we're talking about. Again, plan on about 15% coverage of the wall surface with absorbers. Now, absorbers aren't real pretty. Okay, they're things, they're warts you're putting on the wall. If you have a significant other in your family that doesn't care about audio or home theater as much as you do and cares about aesthetics more than you do, whether that's a male or female, doesn't really matter. You get into issues. Or if you like the room to look good and clean, putting a bunch of these absorbers on the walls makes it look ugly. I was looking for a good word. There's no other word. Mm-hmm. So what? Well, they don't have to be visible. You can do a stretch fabric wall. So that same thing I showed you before with the track, which is, where's my piece of track here? Forget. But you can actually put some absorbers on the wall, maybe 4-inch thick. You can put some furring strips to build out about 3.5 or 4 inches. You can put those tracks on the wall and stretch fabric to cover the absorbers. And if you're going to do that, make sure the fabric is acoustically transparent.
Hey, so I don't want to put my foot in my mouth, but Gina and I were talking the other day about if you put too much system in a room. I've heard systems, small rooms with this crazy systems with multiple subs and giant speakers, and it almost feels like it overpowers the room. Is there a nomenclature or a word for that? You seem to have a mastery for that. I mean, I'm all about lots of big subs and lots of speakers, but I've just had people put way too much in a room, and it just, as you turn it up, it feels like the room's just crushing it. Is there a word for that? Am I on a limb?
There's a lot of different things that can happen that lead to that. And it doesn't have to be a problem. So let me give you a counterexample from the car business. We all understand cars. Well, yeah. You could take a small. Remember when Ford made these Mustangs? They were compact cars with a 4-liter engine in them. Mm-hmm. Was that too much power for the car? Well, probably. On a wet road, you push that right pedal. It's like woo.
I had a 5.0. Yeah, it was.
You had a 5.0. That's right. They made 5.0. Mm-hmm. So that's ridiculously huge for the size of the car. Is that awesome? Is that wrong? Awesome. So until you don't know how to drive, you have bad tires, you're not experienced, and you're on a road that's a little bit wet or icy, then dude, it's ugly. So that's my way to introduce the fact that you can have big speakers in a room that's small, but beware. What happens is when you're too close to the speakers, the distances between the drivers prevent good integration, and your ear hears that as like, it's not adding up correctly. There's actually lobes in the frequency response, and the mid bass may not be smooth. You may end up with a ton of bass coming out from just the locations of the left and right speakers and causing standing waves that wouldn't quite be there if you had smaller speakers with a subwoofer. So suddenly the bass gets lumpy. It just, rather than be nice and tight and punchy, it sounds slow. And I've heard people go, well, these are too big of a woofers and they're slow. All woofers are slow. Woofers work up to 200 hertz.
Right,
that's
compared
infinite,
to
that's infinite time in the world of how things are. You know, at 100 hertz, it takes a full 10 milliseconds to go back and forth. You can actually hear 20 milliseconds, like events that are 20 milliseconds from each other. Certainly at 25, you can actually hear them. So a woofer at 100 hertz is going back and forth at 10 milliseconds. That's forever.
One of the reasons I say that is many years ago, remember the Snell Music and Cinema Reference System? That Kevin Oakes designed. I had that in a very small room, and it was just like, she turned it up, it just like, it was too much. So Gene and I were debating that.
So I think what you were experiencing there, and Kevin Vakes, I don't think you're watching. Hi, good friend. I like him. You were probably just too close to an array that was made for a much bigger room, in which the drivers, you know, that thing had is a tapered array with a bunch of drivers, and just not adding up right. You got to be a little further for it to sound right. And maybe also a low frequency design that was made for rooms with less room gain in the frequencies where a small room has room gain. That's what I got to say. There's a lot of factors that can affect that. So there it is. Now,
is that something that can be fixed with treatments?
Yep, you can treat it with fixments. You can fix it with treatments to an extent, but if you have that problem of the drivers being too far away from each other, so that you're too close and they're not, you know, they're lobing rather than have a proper integration, they're lobing. You can't fix that. You got to just, you know, go back further all the way back to the room.
You have to mechanically change the room, right?
Yeah, you know, knock down the wall behind you. You'll be fine. And then the other part, which is the low frequency issues, you can fix that maybe with some bass traps and with some equalization to get rid of some of the boost there. Anyway, getting back to this business of the acoustically transparent panels, I actually brought. I mentioned earlier on the. Let's go back to the camera. I mentioned earlier that in the world of stretch fabric tracks, there's a bunch of companies that do those. I had a sample up there. There's Whisper Walls. There's a whole bunch of them. There's one company that I'm probably going to give a shout out to that makes a material that you can actually buy directly from them. That is actually this interesting click and place track. So this has a little hinge here, and you put the fabric on here on a self-adhesive thing, and then you click it down and it self-stretches. It's pretty cool. And I'm having a complete senior moment and forgetting the name of the brand.
But is that a product you sell for your business?
No, you can just buy it directly from the vendor. It's just a thing for do-it-yourselfers. You can actually buy those tracks directly, as opposed to the other ones. They're always sold through a network of authorized dealers. And I will remember. Sorry, I can't believe I'm spacing that out. That's ridiculous. Okay, so you can also put treatments behind an acoustically transparent screen if you're using that for your video. That's another place to put them. Other ways to conceal these things, other than a stretch fabric wall, which is a common thing to do, and much later in this presentation I'll show you a bunch of pictures of that. It doesn't have to look like a typical upholstered room with all this decorative stuff. It can actually look like it's just been painted, or like it has just wallpaper. But you can also do custom prints. So instead of a panel that's covered with a blue cloth or a black cloth or a gray cloth, you can actually, there's some vendors out there that will print materials on them. So this is an example of a panel that's printed with a Jaguar. Looks pretty good, right?
Very
this
beautiful.
is actually an absorbing panel. It's actually, this particular one is a demo one that's 1 inch thick, but it looks really amazing. right here in my little home office up there, I've got a little decorative floral pattern that's also printed. So that's been printed on a fabric, and behind that is 2 inches of treatment. And the printing these days can just look absolutely amazing. We can even do this thing. So that's one of the products we do under the brand Living Sound, is to do these custom prints. Other people do them too. Once in a while, we get brought to printing imitation of wood. So this is a wood panel. Actually, wow. I don't even, can you guys still hear me through this?
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, so it's acoustically transparent, so you should be hearing me. But this was actually a print done for some ceiling materials. And it was the actual wood. The light doesn't quite reveal it, but it looked exactly like the wood planks we were sent to photograph and print. And it was just like, you look at the two side by side, it's like, well, it looks just the same. You stretch that up and boom, you've got yourself either a wood surface, a cabinet door, whatever you need.
So this is something we talked about a while ago. As long as you own the rights, as long as you own your own poster,
right,
you could do this for a one-off.
Right. So let's say you have a room and you have cabinet doors and you want to put speakers in them, or you want to turn some of those cabinet doors into sound absorbers. You can either have those doors taken off, photographed, and then send the picture, a good quality picture, to a printer. You can send it to us, and we can mount that onto an absorber panel. The print job has to be a well done job on an acoustically transparent fabric with an ink that doesn't cut off the sound, and that's called dye sublimation. You have to do that right. Other things you can do, just to move along, is to use porous plasters. So now that's an interesting thing. Also coming out of my little box of tricks over here, this is a sound absorber. So what is this? This is a thickness of, well, you can't see it. It's a thickness of fiberglass or rock wool, and it's applied usually on the ceiling of a room or the walls up at a slightly higher elevation. And then you trowel on there a plaster that's acoustically transparent. So sound goes through the plaster, gets absorbed by the fibrous material behind, and boom, you're done.
Wait, acoustically transparent plaster?
Yeah.
You're the audio god. Wow. I've never even heard of that. That's amazing. Well, I mean, we do invisible speakers, so why not?
You do invisible speakers. So this stuff has been around for 20 or 25 years. Wow. The first company that started that was a European company called Baswaphone. There's now 5 or 6 different ones. There's 2 US made ones. The plaster is usually made out of micro crushed glass or glass beads or fiberglasses. You know, there's formulations so that the sound actually gets through it and then hits the absorption behind. So you can do a ceiling where you do that and you walk in the room. It just looks like a regular painted ceiling, but it's absorptive. However, if you do the whole ceiling, it's going to be over absorbed. So what we usually do when we spec this is there's sections of this that are fiberglass and then sections that are a hard foam that's just exactly the same thickness, fiberglass, hard foam. We stagger them, move them around or select where they are. And you end up with a room that has that typical recipe of about 15 to 20% absorption, but doesn't look like it. So museums use this a fair amount. Big office spaces use this kind of thing. And like I said, there's 4 or 5 vendors of these things. This particular one is a Dutch company called Asona. And you can't really see it, Asona. And this material is called Sonacoustic. It's distributed in the US by Sonacoustic, Asona USA. Now, it's not cheap. I gotta be clear. It's about $35 to $40 a square foot, so it does add up. But aesthetically, it looks like nothing ever happened in the room. Now, we're not done yet. You can actually get micro-perforated woods from different vendors. There's multiple companies doing that. I've got some other samples in my box of tricks. Of course, they just all fell down. Please hold.
I could just imagine Anthony Grimani as a child. Other kids are playing with blocks. They're playing with Legos. Anthony's playing with acoustical products, coming up with ideas to make the room
away,
sound
Anthony,
better.
before I bust your ass.
This is my Lego block, man. This is a piece of wood, right? That's slotted. Now, that's going to reflect some sound. Some sound's going to go through that slot and get absorbed by a material you're going to put behind. So you typically put this on the wall in front of 1 inch or 2 of some absorptive material. Again, glass fiber, rock wool, recycled jeans. And This particular company called Murano sells it in a few different ways, including a tongue and groove. So, you just put them side by side.
So you're saying that's an absorber and a reflector?
It's a combination of an absorber and a high frequency reflector. If you stagger it correctly, you'll get a little diffusion out of that too, depending on the models. They make a version that's got small holes. They make a version that's got microscopic holes. There's a company called Navy Island that makes it micro perforated. You can't even see the holes are there. You can get it slotted so that it actually looks like it's a textured material. But if you look closely, there's little holes in there and you can also see where I hit my finger. See, I get work done. Yes, that hurt. And so there's holes in there. Again, the sound goes through that. Different textures, different styles. Whatever, like they say in English, suits your fancy. So that's another way to do it. Again, there's multiple vendors of these wood materials that you can use. And then there's perforated sheet metals. You can get sheet metal micro perforated or perforated, interleave that into a decor where you've got, some fabric and some metal, and you backlight it, you powder coat it a certain color. Just, let your creative imagination go at it.
All right. Well, let's get back to business over here.
So we are about 50 minutes into this, Gene. You tell me, how much longer do you want to go?
I mean, we covered absorption pretty thoroughly. We haven't talked a whole lot about the diffusion or the reflection or the bass traps, and we might have to save some of that for a second part next week.
I had planned on doing diffusion another day because I still have a bunch of stuff to do on absorption. So I'll roll out a few important slides and then we'll move on. Okay.
So let's keep this to absorption and we'll kind of wrap it up in 10 or 15 minutes and we'll continue next week.
So absorbers, if we get back to let's say you were allowed to do your man cave or your woman cave, whatever you want to call it, your person cave, and you're allowed to do
non-binary cave,
a binary cave, and you're allowed to put absorbers on the walls. It's okay. You can choose them from most vendors will source them to you as a square edge, or a radiused edge, or a beveled edge. And that's just what I'm showing over here. There's a bunch of different ways to make those look. And in some rooms, the radiused edge makes it look a little smoother, or the beveled edge makes it look less thick and integrates better. If you have some wood moldings and stuff, the bevel can look better, whatever. I talked a little bit about the fact that the fabrics you're going to put either on your stretch wall or your acoustical panel does need to be acoustically transparent, as in the sound has to get through the fabric to find the fiber, or else it's not going to absorb. So make sure that the fabric is acoustically transparent up to 16 kilohertz. If you're going to cover treatments with that, if you're going to happen to cover surround speakers or front speakers with that fabric, it better be good up to 16 kilohertz. And how do you know? Well, most manufacturers don't give you real relevant data on that. I've seen very, very few fabrics that show you the transparency character of a fabric. I've measured about 60 or 70 of them, but you can actually do this yourself. You can play pink noise out of a speaker, which you can get from lots of different sources. You can get it on a cell phone, whatever. There's a lot of different sources for pink noise. And then you can listen to it, and you can put the fabric between the speaker and your head. And if it doesn't change a lot, chances are it's pretty good. You can go to the next step, which is you can use that $100 USB test microphone and Room EQ Wizard, measure the direct sound of the speaker to the mic, put the fabric in the middle, and see how much difference there is. You can actually see how much attenuation it's going to do. All right. Now, here's a quick collection of a whole bunch of different absorbers and things you can buy. First, I am going to shamelessly plug a thing we make. This is our most expensive absorber. It's called the Dimension 4 Symphony Absorber. It's an interesting device that's in a wood box, in which it's filled with 4 inches of rock wool covered by a fiberglass mat in the front, so it's a little tympanic at low frequency. And you'll notice that the sides are slotted. And that's in order to get all the benefits of a 4-inch thick material, but on the sides, we actually taper down the absorption. So we get that thing I talked about earlier, which is to reduce the amount of high frequency effect. So the combination of the mineral wool and fiberglass sheath can give you up to 50% more absorption coefficient than a 2-inch straight fiberglass box. And this thing works from 200 hertz to 20 kilohertz. And somewhere in here, I don't know where the thing went that shows it's got a tapered high frequency absorption. Mm-hmm. Another one of the lines of things that I'm peddling these days is called Sonitus. You can go to Sonitus USA and look at that. That's the panel I showed before that's got the curve shape. It's a dense polyester foam. I didn't used to be a big believer in foams a few years ago because they tended to not work very well at low frequency. And then I found this vendor in Europe that makes this higher density polyester foam that works well down into lower frequencies. So this particular thing is a foam with a flocked finish that provides a little tympanic character at the front, which again gives it more low frequency performance. There's an 8 centimeter and a 12 centimeter version, which means 3 and 5 inch. It's available in many colors, and it works from 250 hertz all the way down to 250 for the 12 centimeter version, and actually about 280 hertz for the 8 centimeter version. So it's available in black and white and gray, blue, red, yellow, and that's about it. Now, switching gears a little bit. There is a way to make an absorber with a finish that looks like wood, but in which the wood is sufficiently perforated, like I was showing you designs over there, that it's not really affecting the high frequency too much. And we have this panel called the DecoSorber, which is the same polyester material inside here, which is the same thickness, works down to about 250 to 280 hertz. And we cover it with a slotted wood that, because again, it's vented enough, absorbs still very well up to 6 or 7 kilohertz, but it looks more better than a typical fabric. This particular thing is 2 foot by 2 foot. It's available in many finishes, works over this range of frequency. You actually get a little extra kick at low frequency because the panel on the front acts as a membrane absorber, so you get a little bit more low frequency effect. And you can get it in all these different sizes and these different colors and textures and styles.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah. So you get to a point in acoustical treatments where you have to talk about aesthetics. The stuff is going on the walls.
Yeah.
Okay? It's interfering with the look and environment in the room. So you have to think about, well, how do I make this look good? You could also argue that, hey, once you walked in the room and turned off the lights, you don't see it anymore. And like Keith Yates said, you don't notice the room anymore, and there it is. And if it's all dark, it's gone. So that's another argument. But there's a psychological thing that happens when you walk into a room. If it's pleasant to be in, if it's natural and feels warm, and it's just going to be a better experience. So I don't like rooms that look completely like audio labs, even though I'm a complete audio geek. I prefer rooms that look pleasant.
Comfortable. Yeah. Colors and lighting and whatnot.
So if you want to treat a room and you don't have the budget to use some of these products, and I know this is probably an uncomfortable question for you because you make a living selling acoustical products as one of your businesses. What can people do naturally at home? How to like heavy drapery? Is that an effective absorber? Is it more of a reflector? Bookcases for diffusion, that kind of stuff. What do you recommend when people are trying to do those kind of things in the room?
So for many years, and still today, the one approach at making a room sound good is to use what Dr. Floyd Toole calls the stuff of life, the stuff you have in your room. So draperies on windows provide some absorption, and I have it's perfectly on cue. I have a slide queued up to talk about the goods and bads of draperies. Bookcases, if the books are like at different depths, provide diffusion. Elements on the walls that are sort of broken in shape provide some amount of scattering. So there are things you can put in a room, including furniture, that are naturally going to provide some amount of damping, not dampening, but damping of the sound reflections and some amount of scattering. So yeah, you don't have to buy stuff from me or the other people who sell it. You just put stuff on the walls. It's just when you get into dedicated movie theaters, are you going to put windows with drapes? Are you going to put bookcases? Well, probably not. And that's where things get kind of like, well, how do I deal with this? It's a dedicated room that doesn't have all of those trappings of life. So the other thing I want to say is you can make absorbers yourself. But beware, you're buying fiberglass or rock wool panels. You're cutting them. They're going to get into your nose. They're going to get onto your skin. Then you're using glues. that are all filled with VOCs that are, they don't smell so good. They're not that good for you. They're going to get all over your face. It's not a pleasant process. So if you're into the DIY and you're going to do them yourself, please, goggles, respirators, buy one of those hazmat suits at your disposal, put a hat on and go at cutting your fiberglass and gluing stuff on there, because it would be too bad for you to start to get into toxic issues just because you wanted to save a little money on your absorbers.
So the stuff you buy that's pre-done, like your acoustic absorbers and stuff, does that stuff degas when you hang it up, or is it like it doesn't let out an odor, or is it take a period of time for that to just kind of reach equilibrium?
Yeah, the materials you get, not everybody, but the materials we use are all low VOC or low outgassing. When we do have them made in the plant, they sit around for about 3 or 4 days to outgas whatever's left, and they're not going to have a lot of odor like new carpeting or other new materials tend to have. Yeah, good question. Okay. I am sensitive to the environmental conditions. We got to watch out for what we're breathing. Totally off topic, but related. Do you notice how there's a lot more people that have diabetes today? It's become a really big business, really big issue. There's all kinds of causes environmentally in this thing. People are drinking soft drinks that either have high fructose corn syrup, or they're drinking replacement sweeteners that are even worse for you. They're eating bad. They're not sleeping enough. They're stressed out. But then also our environmental conditions, our pollution conditions are bad to the point where our liver is busy filtering out all this crap that we breathe in and eat. Once the liver's kind of choked up and sick, you start to get into diabetic issues. Your endocrine system goes bad.
Funny you said that. My father-in-law that just passed away was in Vietnam, and he got full service connected disability because of diabetes related to Agent Orange. So that's very true from the chemical. Absolutely. Right. I'm glad you said that.
And so be careful. I'm not saying that making a few absorbers is going to give you diabetes, but it's one more contributor. Let me rewind. Watch out for what's going in your nose and in your mouth. And if you're going to make these things yourself, judge carefully whether you want to save a little money and give yourself a hassle for 2 weekends cutting crap that's really unpleasant, or if it's just better to spend the money from somebody making it. And they're not that expensive. Anyway, now back to the slide where I want to talk about draperies. So draperies are a common solution to try to do some damping on the walls. Again, not dampening. I say that because dampening is the act of putting water on something. Damping is the act of reducing the free flow of vibrations. So draperies are uneven acoustical absorbers. One of these panels that I'm showing, where's my little panel? Here. One of these panels is a known device. This thing is going to absorb the same way every day, day in and day out. But a drape is going to change as you open and close it. It's going to have different characteristics for its absorption. And it's not going to absorb very much at lower frequencies. If a drape is all the way up against a window, the fabric that's all the way up against the window is not absorbing at all. And it's only the fabric that's far away from the window that's doing something. So you want a gap. And then also the amount of pleating you have, how full the drape is going to affect the absorption. And then the kind of material you use. So you want to use a relatively heavy material. So one of the 32-ounce velour type materials, or, heavy thing that's going to actually obviously absorb sun because it's so heavy. And you want to have a gap to the surface, whether it's a window or a wall.
What about some mass-loaded vinyl behind the curtain? Would that be something?
So mass-loaded vinyl behind the curtain is going to block the sound, but it's not going to help with absorption at all. If you need to make a drape that's blocking a stairway, so that you have this big stairway, your theater's here, and there's no door, you can try to source a curtain with mass-loaded vinyl. It's going to be heavy.
Yeah, I figure that. Real heavy.
So generally try to have about a 75 millimeter air gap, which is about 3 inches. And use heavy velour. You may not like the look of that, but that's what works. Okay. And go for a drape, what's called 100% fullness, which means that the drape is twice as long, or that when it's actually in fully deployed shape, it's only half the length of the full drape. So it's still got a fair amount of pleating. So, now I'm glad you asked the business about the vinyl barrier, because you can make a really interesting drape that provides some diffusion. So let's pause 1 second. Imagine you have a room. I see this a lot. The full left wall of the room is all windows. Beautiful view, on downtown Chicago. It's all windows. And you put a giant heavy drape over that whole thing. What's just happened to my rule of too much absorption?
Yeah, you just blew it.
You just blew it. The room's dead. It's dead all on one side. The other side may be reflective. There's going to be excessive symmetry. It's not going to sound that good. So if you're going to have big areas of drapes, just because you have a lot of them, there's a thing you can do in making the drape, and you have to commission a special custom-made drape. But instead of using all heavy materials, what I like to do is to use a thinnish surface layer, a blackout vinyl on the back side, and in the middle, strips of heavy, thick, what's called waffle bump in the curtain industry. It's just a really heavy flannel. So now what you have when you look at this drape is, when you get past the acoustically transparent fabric, is strips of absorptive material, and then a curved area of relatively heavy blackout shade. So that drape's actually going to be a bit of a scattering device and some absorptive device, not going to absorb everything. That's the right way to do that. That's going to be expensive. You're looking at typically $40 to $50 a square foot for the smaller drapes, and $25 to $30 a square foot for the larger drapes. And it's going to be made by a custom drape maker. That's a way to do it.
Right.
More than you ever wanted to know about drapes. Next, we can talk about the pleating at the top and the fullness of this thing and all that stuff. I know all this because we do actually make a line of drapes called Eclipse. It's all about that. All right, let's get on to the final pieces over here. So I'm going to skip the business of low frequency absorbers and keep that for a presentation later. Let me see if there's anything else I want to. Yeah, so this is great. We're gonna pause here, and I'm gonna reserve this for a session either next time or after we talk about diffusion. Gene, would you like to talk about base absorbers next time or about scattering devices? You choose.
Scattering devices. Come on, Gene.
Hey, Don. Hey.
You know
Gene,
what? I'd say
I'll tell him later.
Let the viewers vote down below. You guys need to give us some comments. Let us know what you want next week's Thursday topic to be about.
Yep.
Diffusion, scattering devices, or low frequency absorbers. I lean towards the bass stuff because I'm a bassaholic. I like talking about integrating multi-sub so you could reduce the load of low frequency absorption. Yep. And we'll be talking a lot about that.
Yeah.
So I say somebody wants to buy my Marantz Blu-ray player. Okay. It's hard to get electronics right now. So yeah, I think guys, why don't you give us some comments down below? Anthony, appreciate you dropping all this knowledge on us. Don, adding your installation insights is awesome. We are building the Avengers team here, the Audio Avengers. I hope Marvel doesn't sue us, but I think we're on to something here.
So Anthony, just want to, Gene and I are doing some audio video consulting with the followers, people that are trying to build spaces. How can they get in contact with you, or what's the process to bring the master in to do the acoustics on this? Because I mean, we're going to showcase it obviously in the Audioholics smart home, and we're going to do a lot of videos on that. But what can they do to be able to deal with the man?
So you can reach out to me directly. I had, let's see here. Let me see if I can just put my email address up here. Give me a second here. I could put it in the description below anyway. Yep.
So when someone clicks on the description, that's not a problem. And I'll put some links to your website. In fact, another thing we could talk about in the next video is you have turnkey solutions for people based on the square footage of their room. And you kind of make it easy for them to know how many absorption panels, how many diffusion panels, gets you pretty close to what you need. And it's a very easy solution, and you have it at different levels too. So we probably should talk about that in the next one as well, but I'll put some links there so people can look ahead.
Yeah. So this is sort of similar to the companies that now sell like ready-made recipes delivered to your door. You can take these long classes. You can go to the Cordon Bleu school in Paris. I guess they have them in other places too. Or you can sort of take advantage of the work we've done over the years of figuring out what works as a good combination of stuff, all of which I'm just talking about over here. It's nothing that I'm hiding here, but on our website, under what's called Sonatus, USA. So SONITUS.com. You can actually look at these different solutions that are basically based on room size. So all that stuff I talked about with the absorbers and said, try to stick to 15%, put them here, put them there. That's all in the package. And you can just enter your room size. We have them at different price levels, from really cheap and cheerful to very sophisticated. And you can do that. Here, I'll write that on there. Just give me a second. SONITUS.USA.com.
There you go.
So can you guys see that? All right. Let's see if I can even do this. Ink. All right. So the top thing is my email address. Feel free to email me. I do get a fair amount of emails a day, so don't despair if I don't answer right away. And then you can also go to Sonitus USA and look at what's available there. And, in all fairness, we're not the only people making acoustical treatments. There's other good vendors out there, all of which are competent. I'm kind of weird about this. I think of the other manufacturers as not as competitors, but as colleagues. We're all singing the same thing, which is
very cool.
Look at how you're treating your room before you worried about esoterica of cables and tippy toes and all this other stuff, because it's important. So much of that's bouncing around the room and messing up your sound field. You got to treat it. So
if you had to put it in a percentage, would you say 50-50 equipment choice, room 60-40?
At least 50-50, if not 60-40, what the room does to your speakers versus just to the speakers alone. There's a really, really interesting paper by guys from Dolly loudspeakers in Europe from a while back now, 20 years ago. I'll leave you with this completely crazy thing. They took a bunch of good speakers from them. So Dolly is a company started by Peter Lingdorf. They make great speakers over in Europe. They make them in Europe. They sell them around the world. But they took a bunch of different speakers from well-known manufacturers, all of which are considered, good, high-quality speakers. And they put them in this big anechoic chamber. So this is a big room. In this case, I think it was about 60 feet by 60 feet, big one with big, thick, deep absorbers. I think about 3 meters, if I remember right, really big, 10 feet absorbers. And they put these speakers all in there, and played sound out of the speaker, put a test microphone, an expensive Brulin Care test microphone in front of the speaker, and took the output of that microphone, put it through a preamp and a headphone amp, and you could listen to the sound of the speaker through the microphone to your ears. Okay, why would you do that? Well, they had a test in which they would listen to the speaker versus a wire that went directly from the source around all that directly to the headphone amp. Okay, so you're comparing a wire, right, to an amplifier, speaker, microphone, mic preamp, and then the headphones. And you go, there's no competition. You're going to hear the speakers in the way. Well, no. Trained listeners on good speakers in an anechoic room could not tell which was the wire versus the speakers. And this is not just Dolly saying our speakers are good. They had other brands in there. I forget now. I forget. There was a PSB. There was B&W. I forget. So 20 or 25 years ago, you could already make a speaker that was linear enough that an amplifier, a speaker, a mic, a good test microphone. I'm not talking about a singing mic, but a really good high quality test microphone, a mic preamp, and switches was indistinguishable. Yeah, you follow that, right?
Yeah. People think they can do that through YouTube now.
Yeah. So step one of the test. So they're showing that, hey, if these speakers all have a good frequency response and a good amp, good phase response, they're basically transparent. They are neutral. They convey the sound that's hitting them perfectly. Right. We're not done. Then they took those same 4 speakers and put them in a listening room. And everybody could tell the difference between speaker A, B, C, and D. All 4 of those speakers had different radiation characteristics. What's called the sound power, how they radiate sound into the room, was different. And so the difference between the anechoic space, where you couldn't hear the difference between the speakers and even a wire, versus the non-anechoic space is the echoic character of the room. So you take all these speakers that sound exactly the same in an anechoic room, and you put them in the room, they all sound different. What's the difference? Right. The room.
The room. Yeah. Absolutely.
Right? And so thanks for indulging me in this little 3-minute
No, it's awesome. It's awesome.
And I I had a print of that paper, and I couldn't find it in my office the other day. I'll try to relocate it. Maybe if anybody's listening that knows that piece of research from the guys from Dolly, please do send it to the group. It was an amazing paper. It was presented in one of the audio conferences out there. Really fascinating. But the bottom line is the room matters a lot. And at this point, and I would say for the last 20 or 30 years, speaker manufacturers and driver manufacturers and amp manufacturers have known how to make stuff that's linear. The signal that goes in goes out without being polluted. It's fine.
Right. Right.
I mean, that's one of the things as an integrator, we tend to sell and design the same speakers quite a bit because we're familiar with them. We understand their characteristics. I can't tell you how many times that I put the same speaker in a different room and had a almost completely different sound over and over and over.
Totally.
And that's where the experience comes in.
Totally.
That's where the room makes all the difference. Guys will be out there or influencers or people that listen to a speaker in one environment. How can you give an accurate representation of it if you haven't heard it in multiple environments? Exactly. That's my point. Yeah.
It's impossible. So
absolutely.
the thing that's even funner with that, you're mentioning the same speaker in different places. Imagine when you're doing a multi-room system with the same either ceiling speakers, typically, they're all plugged to the same kind of amps. You're all playing. You walk from room to room to room, and it's
same
like
amp, same everything.
Night and day, same level.
Family room different, totally different. That's where I'm glad that a lot of companies now are adding some kind of DSPs or equalization. So we can at least kind of sort of work through that a little bit. But you're absolutely right. I've done 15, 16, 18 zones of audio and have them all sound differently. Same speakers, same amp, same everything.
Yeah. I love, I often get contracted to design a theater, tune the theater, and while I'm there, tune the multi-zone. And of course, you got to specify some form of equalization. So there's a bunch of manufacturers out there that do these, and they're good quality amps that have built-in DSP, and you go through room by room and tune them. And you can get to a point by doing that, you can set the level and set the EQ where you can walk through the entire residence, even a really big one, and it all sounds exactly the same. Sound
reinforcement. You have a consistent sound throughout the project, which is awesome. But acoustics, the final frontier. That's what I'm calling it. It is the final frontier.
That's in my second or third slide of this whole presentation.
Is it
the final frontier?
Is it? That's awesome. That's
Thank
awesome.
you.
Well, it's an honor, truly, to be working with a god in the industry. I mean, we all have our rock stars. When you're in the audio video business, Grimaldi's one of them.
Thank you.
Seriously, not trying to blow smoke, but you are what you are. And I'm so glad that we can bring this to all the Audioholics followers who are trying to invest and spend their hard-earned dollar. Even if they're buying a modest system, acoustics still matter. Treatments still matter.
Yeah. You can do, it's amazing what you can do with a decent, good quality receiver and decent speakers for not that much money, set up correctly with a bit of EQ that's built into most of the receivers and some treatment. You can do something that's amazing sounding.
Yeah, but still, from the transitional frequencies up, though, it's all about mechanical treatment. I mean, it really is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you, Anthony.
Okay. All right, guys.
Before we go, this is for Gene. This is
nice
a chocolate for you Danes in the room. This is a Danish-made little bottle. It's got a little. This one has got Drambuie in it. That's how I finish my day.
Oh man, you're killing me, dude. You're killing me.
I'm on keto. War. You just started a war because I'm gonna have to start bringing my chocolate on.
Yeah, you bastard. I'm on keto.
Next episode, I'm bringing my chocolate on.
I'm gonna drink my good bourbon, then piss on you.
that just blows your keto. All right, guys. Well, let's wrap this up now. Anthony, Don, thank you guys for coming here. Awesome. Guys, don't forget about our Patreon channel at patreon.com/audioholics. You have full access to the slide presentation. If you want to go through it, you want to read ahead for the next presentation. We're going to be doing this show pretty much every Thursday going forward at 11 p.m. Eastern time. If I change that time for whatever reason, look at the community tab on our YouTube channel. I'll announce it days in advance so you guys can bookmark it. Make sure you hit that bell notification so you get notifications of when these videos drop. And until next time, my friends, keep listening.